I am not a historian, but neither are you. So how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. To kick off this week's episode, guys, I'd like you to do something for me. Look at this photo. Looks like a still from a movie, right? Soldiers dressed and ready for battle, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, ready to fight and die for their country against, most likely, a foreign foe. But this isn't from a movie. This was a picture taken in Washington, D.C. this past week. Soldiers standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to stop protesters, those in the streets crying out that Black Lives Matter, from doing something. It's a menacing photo, but it also brings to mind a thought. What would happen if the American military were deployed to take down Americans? Last week in the Rose Garden, guys, President Trump proudly exclaimed that he is a law and order president, which is fine. But after reminding America of what his favorite television show is, Trump decided to go ahead and say that if the protests around the country would not stop,
then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
And once Trump raised the idea of utilizing the military to stop these protests, something called the Insurrection Act of 1807 started popping up all over television, all over social media, and was talked about by everybody from constitutional and legal scholars all the way to your cool Aunt Jen. I had never heard of it until this past week, so I figured, well, if everybody's talking about it, and it's the Insurrection Act of 1807 being early 19th century, which means that this act has something to do with our American history, I should perhaps delve into it and look at you get a little bit of a glimpse as to how my thought process works. So what is the Insurrection Act of 1807 and what is its purpose? How about we start with the written definition of the actual act? Now, the Insurrection Act, which is a federal law, says, quote, "In all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, either of the United States or of any individual state or territory, where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth the militia for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection or of causing the laws to be duly executed, it shall be lawful for him to employ for the same purposes such part of the land or naval force of the United States as shall be judged necessary, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect." Which basically means that the president has the right to send in the military to restore peace in times of crisis. But before just charging in with the military, there are a couple things that a president has to do before invoking the act. To begin with, the president, quote, "must first issue a proclamation ordering the insurgents to disperse within a limited time. If the situation does not resolve itself, the president may issue an executive order to send in troops." It also allows the president to send in troops if there's a natural disaster, like if a hurricane hits, or in the case of a terrorist attack. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, states, those are sovereign entities, aren't they not? And don't they have their own forces? They have their own local and state police forces as well, as each state has its own National Guard. Why would we even need this act? To which I say to you, you're right. More often than not, a state's forces should be enough to quell any insurrection happening within that particular state. But in some cases, there are times where a governor can call on the president to invoke the act. Matter of fact, this actually happened back in 1992 following the acquittal of 4 police officers who were caught on camera beating a man by the name of Rodney King, who was an African-American man. They went to court, they were acquitted, riots ensued. At the time, California's governor, one Peter Wilson, called upon President Bush, the first George Bush, to invoke the Insurrection Act because the state's forces could not handle the amount of rioting that was happening in California. So President Bush enacted it. Now, a governor or a state's legislature can call upon the president to invoke the Insurrection Act. However, a president can also go over the heads of governors to carry out that act if they so choose. The following section of the act reads as thus: "Whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impractical to enforce the laws of the United States in any state state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. So why does this act even exist in the first place? 1807. What happened back in 1807 that was such a threat to the young nation at the time that an act like this had to even be created by Congress? Well, that story, my friends, has to do with a man. A man who was on the precipice of achieving the ultimate power in the United States, only to end up disgraced and having that power snatched away, and him finding new ways to gain a foothold in the political arena in the United States. And you all know this man. You all know this man very well, because he is the other main character in your favorite Broadway musical, Hamilton. Yes! Talking about Aaron Burr. So Aaron Burr, in case you guys don't know, was actually this close to becoming president of the United States. During the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson received the most votes, which made him president. Aaron Burr came in second, thus making him Jefferson's vice president. But in 1804, Aaron Burr faces off in a lethal duel against his political rival, one Alexander Hamilton, and he shoots and kills Hamilton during that duel. Now, Aaron Burr didn't go to prison for killing Hamilton, right? But killing Hamilton automatically made Aaron Burr a pariah. Nobody wanted anything to do with Aaron Burr anymore, okay? Especially after you shoot a well-respected and well-liked politician like Alexander Hamilton. Man, was the first Secretary of the Treasury. What are you thinking? And since Burr has become persona non grata, his prospects in politics have dwindled significantly, which means he can't work in places like New York City or Washington, D.C. anymore. So Burr turns his gaze west. He wants to head west, start a life anew for himself. So what does Burr do once he heads west? Does he think that maybe I'll go out west to the newer part of the United States, all this new land that was purchased in Louisiana, purchased by Thomas Jefferson, maybe start my own law practice, or maybe I'll just go out to that part of the country and just build a country home and just rest and just step away from politics because I've already had way too much going on in my life? Nope! Apparently, Burr wanted to muster a small army, head west, start a war with Mexico, claim that he was actually going to war with Spain, and then whatever lands he conquered in that war, because obviously he would be victorious, he would claim for himself and start his own country, basically start his own empire. Which, alright, I mean, the plan is a bit extreme, it's a bit extra, it's a bit convoluted, it's a bit much, but you know, you go ahead and whatever, you do you, Aaron. So Burr enlists the help of his buddy, General James Wilkinson, to assist him with his grand plan. But here's the thing that you should know about Wilkinson. Wilkinson, he's a sneaky little kitten. Case in point, during the Revolutionary War, guys, this is the guy who participated in a conspiracy to have George Washington removed as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and have him replaced with Horatio Gates. But Wilkinson, seeing an opportunity to maybe elevate himself a bit, decides to go ahead and reveal some of the plot to some other people, thus stopping the conspiracy before it actually gets carried out. And that seemed to be James Wilkinson's MO, man. Turns out he just loved taking part in conspiracies in order to sort of elevate himself in the process, and working with Aaron Burr would be no different. I mean, yeah, sure, totally. You want to start your own country? All right, I'm down to help you, buddy. I'm here for you. Until that is, James Wilkinson decides to go ahead and write a letter to Thomas Jefferson, not naming Aaron Burr by name, but letting President Jefferson know that something is afoot out west. And at this point in time, Jefferson is also concerned about Aaron Burr's behavior. I mean, after all, in the election of 1804, he decided to drop Aaron Burr as his vice president and pick up somebody else. So he's a little worried about this guy's mental state. So Jefferson asks his buddy and future president James Madison if there's anything in the Constitution that will allow him to send a military force out west just to, sort of nip this potential rebellion uprising, just sort of nip it in the bud. Madison replies in a letter that, quote, "It does not appear that regular troops can be employed under any legal provision against insurrections." You have to understand something about Jefferson and Madison. These two, when it came to the Constitution, they were following the Constitution to the letter, okay? If it didn't say it in the Constitution, clearly it meant that it could not be done. So the two are trying to figure out a way to go to Congress and have them give the president the power to do what Jefferson wants to do. Enter Wilkinson's letter. Now, Jefferson knew about James Wilkinson, all right? He knew his reputation of being a sneaky little kitty and all that stuff, right? But at this point, Jefferson is more concerned with what Aaron Burr may or may not do, and he really wants to get Congress to give him this power to send a military to suppress any sort of insurrection. So with Wilkinson's letter in hand, he's like, I've got the proof. Let's take it to the legislature. So with letter in hand, Jefferson issues a proclamation on November 27, 1806. And in it, he claims that Burr is trying to carry out the scheme, and he directs state and federal military personnel to, quote, be vigilant in searching out and bringing to condign punishment all persons engaged or concerned in such enterprise, in seizing and detaining, subject to the disposition of the law, all vessels, arms, military stores, or other means provided or providing for the same, and in general, in preventing the carrying on such expedition or enterprise by all lawful means within their power. In short, Jefferson basically made Aaron Burr public enemy number one. But Burr avoids being captured and then is rumored to be trying to recruit more soldiers to help him with his plan, and it's even said that he's actually reaching out to Britain to help him with this plan as well. So in December of 1806, Jefferson goes to Congress and he's like, look, I hate this guy so much. Plus, he's like trying to go out west and create a country which will border the country that I have just now doubled in size. Not up in here! So the bill that goes through Congress authorizes the president to use land and naval forces to quell any potential insurrections that may occur in the United States. And the bill would become a law 3 months later on March 3rd, 1807. Funny enough, though, the Insurrection Act of 1807, which was designed by Jefferson to stop Aaron Burr from doing whatever he was doing, Jefferson never even got to use it against Aaron Burr because Burr was captured 11 days before the act became the Act of 1807. So when has the Insurrection Act of 1807 actually been used? Let's look at a few examples. In 1808, Jefferson used the Insurrection Act when American merchant ships in the Great Lakes basically disregarded his trade embargo with Britain, so he sent in the military to stop those ships. And as the years went on, the act was amended to accommodate specific instances. For example, remember earlier in the episode when I read you that part of the act which allows the president to go over the heads of state legislatures and governors to send in the military? That part of the act was amended by Congress in 1861. Why? Because President Lincoln wanted to send the United States military into the Confederate States, thus providing a legal basis for the Civil War. After the Civil War, when Ulysses S. Grant becomes president, the act is amended once again to help carry out the 14th Amendment and Reconstruction throughout the southern states. The amendment of the act, which is found in Section 253 of Title 10 of the U.S. Code, states that, quote, when any part or class of its people is deprived of a right, privilege, immunity, or protection named in the Constitution and secured by law, and the constituted authorities of that state are unable, fail, or refuse to protect that right, privilege, or immunity, or to give that protection, the president can send in the military to uphold the rights and privileges that are being denied, which is why President Dwight D. Eisenhower used the Insurrection Act in 1957 to enforce the desegregation of schools. Specifically in Little Rock, Arkansas, when 9 African-American students were denied entry into Little Rock Central High School by the Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus and the state's National Guard. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson would also invoke the Insurrection Act to enforce desegregation in Mississippi and Alabama, respectively. The point, guys, is that the Insurrection Act of 1807 is there for a president to use, but they should only use it as a last resort. Moreover, the act should only really be invoked if there's an injustice that's occurring that is so wildly out of control that the military option becomes the only viable option. However, protesting isn't an injustice. It's a right that the American people are allowed to freely exercise, but in Trump's case, using the military would happily be his first option if left to his own devices because he only believes in displays of strength. Thus the reason he posted these soldiers on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I wonder what Lincoln himself would think of this display. And that is it, my friends, for this episode of US 101. Thank you for watching. And hey, look, now, whenever anyone like your cool Aunt Jen, for example, brings up the Insurrection Act of 1807, you guys have something to talk about. Thanks again to all of you guys for watching, and thanks to all of you that have subscribed to the channel. Hello to brand new subscribers. Welcome. So glad you're here. Thanks to all of you guys that continue to share the videos, like them, leave comments in the comments section. I really appreciate your enthusiasm about the videos and the channel. As always, you can follow US 101 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those links down below in the description box. Guys, I will see you next week for an all-new episode of US 101. Until then, I am all done. And remember, Black Lives Matter.